Welcome, ANC. We're so glad that you're here with us, whether that's the few of you that are here in this room in your little pod quadrant, or if you're at home with your pod quadrant. We are elated. I mean, I personally I'm excited about this situation up here.
Amen.
I'm just happy to be here.
Angie, the situation. Here we go.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know this song by Bono, and just kidding, Bono. Lamar's done a great job picking out the set this morning. There's been a lot of collaboration, and we're going to move through a lot of different moments that are kind of embracing a tension that we feel. I've always struggled with this song. I still haven't found what I'm looking for, but it's definitely, Bono was writing a gospel song. And I feel like it's very psalm-like. It's very Davidic, like King David, wrestling with being a man after God's own heart, wrestling with his faith, but also understanding that this isn't the paradise that God intended. And so, well, crap, we ain't gonna be able to see nothing. Woo.
Y'all know what Jack means.
Find that space as we go through these songs this morning, as we go through the act of worship and listen to the word. We're embracing that tension. We're understanding that this is a place of grace, and that faith is the evidence of what we believe and what we're pushing towards.
Oh, yeah. Still looking. Oh, yeah. Said, I have climbed highest mountain. I have run through the fields only to be with you.
Come on, church, sing it.
Said only to be with you. I have run, I have crawled, I have scaled these city walls, only to be with you. But I still haven't found what I'm looking for.
Help us, Lord.
But I still haven't found what I'm looking for. I haven't cast hundreds, felt the healing in the fingertips. It burned like fire, it's burning desire. But I still haven't found what I'm looking for. But I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Haven't found it yet. Angel now, Lord.
Come on, you know this, sing it.
I believe in the kingdom come, yes, and all the colors bleed into one, bleed into one.
But we gotta do it.
Yes, I'm still running. Jesus, you broke the bones and you lost the chain, carried the cross, all my shame, all my shame.
Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan, and the team leader for the Reach movement, a movement of churches that are growing and multiplying, making more and new disciples of Jesus Christ to transform the world in love and justice. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Pastor Jason Morris and creative arts pastor Samantha Beach Kiley from Austin New Church in, none other than Austin, Texas. So in the last year, they've launched a Spanish-speaking service, adapted quickly to creative online-only ministry in all of its glorious, messy unpredictability. And now they're creating an all-live, in-person, and online service. That's what they're aiming for. All live, in-person, online service. Everybody together in worship. They mined both church and Austin-based talent, embraced imperfection, and put a focus on art in the services. You're going to see that creativity as we talk today. So please join me in welcoming Jason and Samantha in the comments. We're so happy y'all are here with us today. Did I get that y'all right?
That's a well-placed y'all. We'll take that.
It's a Michigan y'all.
Yeah, it's an imposter y'all is what that is, Tom.
Thanks for having us. It's great to be here, Tom.
Hey, I did spend 4 years in North Carolina, so I picked up the word y'all. It's a very useful word because up here in Michigan we say use guys, and y'all is a little more gender inclusive than use guys. But well, hey, so thanks so much for being here, friends. If you are watching or listening, would you please like, share, and subscribe? This is a really simple way. You know, you've got church leaders that need to hear this message as we talk today about how you build a digital team to do worship that's both in person and online and do it well. And the process is for trying to figure that out because it doesn't happen all at once. Jason, we need your help to set the stage here this afternoon. Would you give us a little bit of your own history, a little bit of the story of Austin New Church? Give us just a rundown on that.
Sure. Well, it's a long and sort of winding path that brings us to this particular place. My wife of 28 years and our 5 daughters have been here in Austin, leading Austin New Church we've been here for 8 years. I've been leading in that senior position for about 4 of those 8. But it was a long, circuitous path that got us here. I was raised as a missionary kid in Latin America, in Mexico. My cradle or my early nurturing faith environment would have been white, hot, Pentecostal, anti-Catholic evangelicalism. So you can unpack that in your spare time.
Woo, woo.
Right. So I grew up in a very intense spiritual sort of household and upbringing, and went to Bible school in the very early 90s. Fell in love with the love of my life. We got married in 94, moved back to Mexico, and resumed the youth ministry and the music and art ministry that we did that my dad used to lead. Then needed to come back to school, came to the States, finished an undergrad degree in Chicago, and then went to seminary west of Chicago in a little progressive American Baptist seminary called Northern Theological Seminary. Lost my dad's faith, found my own faith in seminary. That's a different podcast or a different storyline. But in 2009, with 5 kids and no senior leadership experience that I could put on paper, I wrote 230 resumes, 234 to be precise, and got virtually no bites, except for one tiny church in Houston, Texas called Lakewood. And Lakewood, at the time, had a Spanish staff leading the Spanish congregation that were friends of mine growing up. So one thing led to another. I jumped on an airplane, went and explored with the Osteens what it might look like to join Lakewood Church in the capacity of small groups pastor. So I did that and quickly found my way on that very large staff into leadership development and credentialing, which sounds really nerdy, but it's a lot of fun. I ran an internship for students from all over the world that would come to Lakewood to study ministry in the highly nuanced, highly produced congregation of about 50,000 people.
Hold on, there. The past, like I'm trying to remember the pastor's name there.
Joel Osteen.
Oh yeah, that guy, Joel Osteen. I just couldn't remember that name.
Weird story. It's a weird story, but listen, it was a beautiful opportunity out of seminary. I needed to unwind the complexity that I thought faith was about. Needed to find a simple way to make it understandable to people who are on the edge. And you don't have to love every part of the body to respect it and be able to say it's a piece of what needs to happen. And so anyway, joined his staff. We were there for 4 years. found Wesleyan theology as a response to my chemical rejection of highly reformed theology of my upbringing. A separate story.
Thank you, Jesus.
Right. Found the writings of B.T. Roberts, found the quadrilateral, geeked out on the four-legged stool of what makes Wesleyan faith Wesleyan, and joined Austin New Church as the national credentialing director for the Free Methodist denomination. So that would be a small but a sister denomination of the United Methodist Church. Did a 3-year overhaul of their credentialing apparatus. Loved that work, but by the time that went from vision to administration, our church here in Austin needed transition. The founder was done and moving on, and we were coming out as a board of advisors locally, and we wanted to be clear. That put us on the way left wing of Free Methodism, and so I was...
Coming out, you mean affirming of LGBTQ folks?
Correct, not just welcoming, affirming at all levels of leadership, and
yeah.
So we wanted to be clear on that. In Austin, that's essential. If you're going to work among the already churched, then you can be quiet. But that, to us, is an issue of justice, and I could no longer be quiet. That put us way out on the left wing of Free Methodism, and so they chopped that branch, and we became United Methodists. At least initiated that process several years ago now. So that's how I'm here.
What a story!
Wow, yeah.
There's so many ways. I remember as we were talking about this before, there's intersectionalities. Like I grew up Pentecostal. I went to Wheaton College outside of Chicago. I think I got the grace side of Pentecostalism. They weren't quite, doesn't sound quite as much like some of your experience, but
Yeah.
United Methodism was a natural progression for me. I like understood my Pentecostalism in a way I didn't until I started reading John Wesley.
There you go.
So anyway, this is not really an interview with me, but I do think those are interesting intersections. So Austin New Church didn't start out as a United Methodist Church, but you guys...
Right. Yeah, it started as a Free Methodist church plant in Austin, Texas. So if you are a anti-slavery abolitionist Wesleyan figure in the 1840s and 50s, there's not a lot of reasons to plant churches in the Deep South or in Texas. And so Free Methodism down south is almost non-existent. It's mostly Eastern Seaboard and West Coast. But about 13 years ago, the Free Methodist Church decided they needed to get serious about planting congregations in Austin. That's the same time that Brandon Hatmaker had decided that it was time to plant a church here in the city. And so some forces were joined, and Austin New Church from its first day became a project of the church planting apparatus of Free Methodism. So that's how it started. It was not a progressive congregation in the beginning. The Hatmaker's background is Southern Baptist, and they were moving quickly in the direction of becoming missionally engaged, but not yet progressive theologically. And so there's been a lot of shift and turns over the years. It began just as a missional sort of experiment here in Austin that was mildly Methodist, but the only Methodist clergy that's ever served here is me. So that's kind of, yeah.
We're also both second pastors. There we go. Following
And
founder. Hey, so is Austin Church a mega church? I mean, have you got 50,000 people like Joel Osteen, or is it? Give us just the feel.
Yeah, whatever the opposite of mega is what we are. We love our smallness. We do church in a tiny little historic building on Music Row in South Lamar here in the city in the 78704 zip code, which if you don't know Austin, that wouldn't mean anything, but downtown, cultural district downtown. And our building seats capacity of 375 souls. Mm-hmm. So we are a small church. We were probably, I don't know, maybe 600 or 700 people coming into COVID. Have no idea who will emerge and change their jammies. You can never trust online metrics. I mean, what's the difference between engagements and views and likes and all of that? We don't know what happens next, but by, if conservative guessing, we're doing fine. I think we've gained some people, and I don't know what we'll do with them when we open back up fully in September, but that's what we're talking about.
So you're not a mega church, but you're also not like a little country church either. You're somewhere in the middle. We do. So we want to kind of kick this off here a little bit. We're going to watch several video clips from different parts of your service. We're going to look at one that's a little more sort of digital bells and whistles, so to speak. This was an Ash Wednesday service that you all did, which, as I understand, was the first time you've ever done Ash Wednesday.
That's right.
or I think even engaged Lent. So let's, Leslie, will you roll that video for us?
We've never actually done an Ash Wednesday service before at ANC. Actually, if I'm honest, we've never put this much thought in or effort into Lent at all. Most of us come from traditions that didn't feature the church calendar, the lectionary, Advent, Epiphany, or Lent in any real significant way, which makes discovering these things great fun, because our first experiences are always memorable. So let's jump right in with the reading from our text today. It comes to us from the book of Joel, chapter 2. It reads this way. Yet even now, says the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting, with weeping, and with mourning. Rend your hearts and not your clothing. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and relents from punishing. Lent officially begins today with the convocation of something that the ancient world would have called a solemn assembly. Think of it as an all-community intentional fast. Sounds fun, doesn't it? So goodbye beer and goodbye Facebook for a while. Extended seasons of anticipation and preparation are part of what I love most about our Christian tradition. So we engage them here at ANC because they're actually shaping us into the kind of people who understand how things connect. Now, if you received a Lenten box from us, then I'm sure you've already noticed that strange little container of ashes. The beautiful thing about ashes, the ashes that we're about to put on our foreheads, is that they come from somewhere significant. If you didn't have one of our boxes sent to you, and if you don't have one handy, you can pause this and run to your fireplace or even to your grill. Any ashes will do. Ash Wednesday ashes are made from the burned remains of last year's palm fronds. You know the ones the crowd waved when Jesus entered Jerusalem during Holy Week, the ones we waved.
This is the barbecued ribs of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Oh my God. Did that weirdo actually say you can go to your grill? Who is that person?
Hey, you take creative risks in this weird moment. Nice job, friends, by the way. Samantha, tell us, let's bring you on the screen here. Tell us what did it take to pull that off?
Well, so we saw Ash Wednesday as really the kickoff to this whole Lenten season, and we had some visual metaphors that we were going to return to over and over throughout Lent. And so a video was a great way to establish some of that imagery. And we're very fortunate to have recently discovered actually a team of talented filmmakers in our congregation. And they are volunteers, so we try not to overuse them, but they were excited about this idea and the chance to do something a little more artistic. And so one of them, Sarah, really oversaw kind of the film direction, and I gave her the ideas we wanted to capture of the wilderness and the of loneliness and the starkness and also expansiveness of being on a wilderness journey, which we felt like we have all been on this past year. We didn't have to manufacture during COVID. And so it was really setting her free. And then Jason and I worked together on the content of the video. We thought it'd be neat for the scripture. Later on in the video, there's that passage about ashes to ashes and dust to dust. And we thought it would be neat to have that to visually capture the life journey that we're all on. So we had that passage read by a really young member of our congregation, a 4-year-old girl, and an elderly man. And that was my favorite part of the video, to see them read together.
I like the jewelry. That's my favorite part of the video, was the jewelry. Tom, we grew up on Numa videos. That's what happens when you get a film crew and a couple of people together. It's going to look like Numa. You remember Numa from the 90s? The early 90s?
Well, that's something that I've talked with several of my colleagues about, is like, what's the modern day Numa? And for me, it's like a Casey Neistat vlog video on YouTube, or something along those lines. But yeah, Numa YouTubers, those are all inspirations. It's actually not that hard to make it. Like all that was like a handful of establishing shots, a little bit of slow motion, and a narration ripped off, and put underneath it with some, moving music. And it, like, you can do enough like YouTube searching that even if you don't have a staff person, you can figure out how to do that with something as simple as like iMovie or even, I don't know, was it Windows Movie Maker or something? I mean, those basic programs will do what you guys did. It might not be quite as like quality video as whatever they were shooting with, but you can get that basic feel.
Yeah. Well, one of the tricks we've learned, and Sam can speak to this, one of the tricks we've learned is that you have to summon the creative energy of your congregation, then you got to let it go. And one of the mistakes that pastors make, and I do my best not to make this mistake. One of the mistakes that pastors make is they're trying to overshape the creative process of the creatives who bring their skills to bear. And so I just stay out of it, to be honest. I don't know iMovie from Quick Movie from iTunes. I don't mess with it. Sam engages with them, and the couple that does this work, we just get out of their way and let them do it. And so not everything we do has that same sort of artistic lens. We really put a lot of effort into Lent. We really wanted to start it off right. And interestingly enough, we didn't air this on Ash Wednesday. That was the middle of the Iceopolis of 2021 here in Texas. We ran that before the Sunday service following Ash Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
Even, I mean, you have to bend and flex and go with what works. We shot it the week prior, but we didn't air it actually on Ash Wednesday.
So we're going to get to Iceopolis here in just a little bit, but Samantha, you are, or do you go by Sam or Samantha?
Either one. Most people call me Sam.
Sam. That's a good name because that's my son's name. So you're the creative arts pastor. Like what is that? And it was our sense as we were talking with Jason originally, and actually we talked with several pastors through this series we were calling it hashtag Your Digital Team, that we had a lot of like pastors who are kind of clueless technologically, like Jason just said. He's not involved in the filming of this. He's not involved in the production side of it. And then there's somebody beside him who makes his authenticity come across well on the screen. And our sense was, as we were talking to him, that was you. So tell us what your role is and how you two work together in that capacity.
Yeah, well, I would not consider myself a digital expert, but I am an artist. And so I pay a lot of attention to crafting moments. And I think that's been what I've been able to hopefully bring to the table this year. I architect the Sunday experience. And so I work with all the different contributors, whoever's teaching, our poet, our musicians, to create something that's not just unified in content, but has some flow to it and feels like it was really intentionally thought through from start to finish. And so I do that. And then I also see it as part of my job, and this has been hard during COVID, but to build and deploy the community of artists that we have at our church, to find out who those people are and how we can pull them in to make church more beautiful. So that's involved some things outside of the Sunday service, some events and special projects that we've done to get to know those folks. And then I'm sort of an artist in residence too. My craft is theater, which I know we can all cringe a little bit at when we think about using that in a church setting, but I still believe it can work. And so sometimes I'll create dramatic content or spoken word pieces that I perform or pull other people in to help with. So those are kind of the three buckets of my role.
Would you tell us a little more about, you said you do events outside of worship to kind of build that community of artists. Tell us a little more about that. I'm assuming that's pre-COVID, and are there ways that you've maintained that networking and relationship building during COVID and going out of COVID?
Yeah, we've actually been able to continue some of them during COVID. So one of our musicians started an open mic night about a year ago, and we did a virtual version of that, and we're hoping to have our first one back in person coming up. And that's just been a fantastic way to get to know who we have, because people come forward with some of their favorite stuff that they've created, musicians and poets and artists of all kinds. And it's a really fun community event. So that's been kind of a great way for me to get to know who's out there. And then I really wanted to know who more of our visual artists were. And so we did an art gallery during COVID. We felt like our building was empty, but artists were really struggling. And so what a great way to bring some art in and bring some energy into our space. And then people signed up for times to come and walk through the gallery. And for that, we included not just people within our church community, but we reached out to Austin artists that we really respected and asked if they'd want to be part of it. They had a chance to sell their work. And so I think that was a neat intro for them to our church as well, for their first, encounter with us to be, hey, we love what you're up to and we think it belongs in a church.
I think one of the things that, as I'm hearing you talk about that, and that's just hitting me, to do well, really to do both in person, but especially online worship, you have to have creative people and relationships with them. And you have to, as a church leader, network with those folks and build relationships and trusting relationships. And then kind of in some ways, the way I'm hearing the two of you work, Jason lets go a lot of the creative piece and hands it to you, but you're not the one, Samantha or Sam, who's you're not filming it, you're not editing it.
Yeah.
You're just bringing the other people. You're kind of an executive producer.
Yeah.
Putting the creative talent in the room. And we had lost a full-time worship leader, which was kind of our main staff person during COVID, and we've instead hired a producer, is what we've called him or called her. So I wonder, Jason, I'm gonna pitch this to you. As you were heading into the pandemic, where were you headed as a church right before that, and how did you pivot your work, your staff, your budget to respond to that? And as you're thinking like pivot, now we're kind of all pivoting out.
Right. Yeah.
Texas was pivoting out before everybody else was, but
well, not Austin, Texas. You got to differentiate Texas and Austin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I want to be clear about this whole creative community. We had already summoned the forces of creativity before COVID was a thing. And so part of what Sam is able to do is because I suppose, might as well own it. I see my role as pastor as being sort of the namer in chief of a community, meaning there is a role for the artistic people in the community of faith that goes way beyond white guys with big biceps playing wooden guitars and white guys who can talk. There's got to be more. This goes back years for me as an artist and as a creative person. I always dreamed of a church that could cherish all of those gifts, however they're deposited and distributed across the body. So we began that work long before COVID, and boy, am I glad we did, because when we moved our way into nothing but visual communication, we were able then to not just draw something up out of nothing. Like we had to just find the video people within that creative community that we had already summoned. I hope that makes sense. So the sequence was a deep, deep, deep commitment from our leadership to release the artistic gift to come to bear on the local assembly. We've had poetry as an integral part to worship for 2 years now. So our poet sort of began to recreate our expectation around how the words function. Actually, the poet who I just had coffee with just this very morning introduced me to Sam and said, you've got to see some of her creative work. So I went online, and so it all began with poetry. And so then what that meant was, when we got ourselves into a situation where we had nothing but a camera and the rudiments of production, of which I know zero, despite having worked for Joel Osteen for years, I don't know any of that side of things. Then we were able to find the people and tap them and ask them to step in. So we were a creative community already. I don't know how Austin might compare to wherever you're doing church. It's probably an unusually creative community, like an unusually creative city. And so we just worked with that here. But we were coming in strong, doing 2 services, thinking about a third. We'd ebb and flow between 500 and 750 people. And, we were doing 2 weekend services on a Sunday morning. And in January of last year, our Spanish pastor, who you really should meet too, he's doing a phenomenal work in Latin America, all digital thanks to COVID. But he said, well, why don't we put a camera in the back of the room? Why don't we just live stream this? Because the open question for us in the fall of 2019 was, how are we going to do something other than 3 services? Because that feels exhausting. So he had always been saying, well, let's just live stream it and tell people to stay home. And so that felt stressful, but okay, whatever. So we put a camera way in the back, 80 feet from where I'm sitting. You put a camera on the wall or by the sound booth, and he said, let's just do it. It won't hurt. Just don't act like it's even here. And about 3 weeks later, the world shut down. So then we moved that camera right up front. We bought ourselves a bank of lights, and we tried to figure out, how in the hell are we going to do this now without the energy of people in the room? We are over manuscripted in our way we speak. We manuscript every single word. We don't fly off the cuff. We don't do, we don't impromptu do our services. Everything is, and this was true for me before Sam, but it's helped us bring this all together. So then as we move the camera forward, and now I'm awkwardly looking at notes, and you can't see my face because I'm committed to wear a cool hat, and the lights are awful and everything's weird. Then we had to figure out, how are we going to get these words up onto the camera lens so that it looks like I'm making eye contact? And so we just began to adapt, and one at a time, we made some adjustments. The big budget or staffing adjustment we made early in COVID was our missions pastor needed to step away, and so that freed up a little bit of money. And then we went to Sam and said, could you step into a more formal creative production role? Sam also teaches more than any other person besides myself here, so she straddles the creative pastoral teaching side. But so she stepped in and took the bull by the horns, and we started to summon the community, and it's been rewarding and terrifying, and it's been fun.
I want to give people a little taste of what that really. You guys had a really simple setup to begin with, just one camera. You or like if people weren't here during the countdown timer, the band was very tight on the stage, just one simple camera. Let's roll that video of. Actually, Jason, I was just randomly looking through and I found this little moment where you talk about the secret sauce.
Oh God.
Of it. So this gets
Always fun to come back to this little place. You know, this is a weird little space that we've actually created together. And you know that, right? Like, I think sometimes it's worth mentioning. This space is what it is because of you as much as because of any of us. So let's just keep that super clear. You know, if I have to tell you the truth, I guess I will on a Sunday. Why not, right? Like, we don't actually know that much about what we're doing here. If you watch how we've evolved this little thing over the year, you would be super aware that we're kind of making it up as we go. And so one of my great joys actually is popping the hood of this little church and showing curious people what makes it work. ANC is not a very complicated organism, and I'm guessing you already knew that by now. But I actually like it when people say, hey, come on, man, like, what's the secret sauce? Yeah, nope, there's no sauce. What we do is gather as much talent and creativity as we can to express the simplicity of the good news, unfiltered. That's it, that's the sauce. Maybe that's like Franklin's barbecue with no sauce, perhaps. And that's it, that's the secret. If it connects you as much, as we hear that it does, then it's probably because of something simple. It's as much because of who you are and because of where you are in your journey as it is anything that we're doing right or wrong. And that's just the truth of it. We're committed to keeping it simple, live, raw, and real. And that's the only formula.
So there's a lot that I love about that. And I know you're like any pastor watching themselves on screen is always like overly critical of themselves and everything, but it's very simple. It's very intimate. It's the camera's very close to you. And Sam, you and I were talking before we went live, the transition that is happening right now as you all try to welcome people back into the space. And now it feels a little further away. We wrestled with this too. Like when we moved from our cafe, which was a smaller space, back in the sanctuary, it felt intimate and warm in the sanctuary or in the cafe. And then in the sanctuary, it felt like, whoa, really far and cold. Talk to us, Samantha, about that transition and how you all are trying to think creatively through that.
Yeah, well, it's important to us that it begin to feel like a live event for the folks in the room, and not just, we didn't want them to feel like just a studio audience witnessing a videotaping. And so we wanted to pull back the technology that was separating the folks on stage from them to allow for some more engagement. Plus, I was kind of surprised to hear from our remote watchers that they wanted to witness a live event rather than necessarily do a separate service where we talk directly to this camera and talk right to them. They wanted to feel like they were part of the community. And so we're embarking on this more of a hybrid thing than we've been doing all year. And it's an adjustment. We are getting used to new equipment. We did just invest in a camera that's going to get a tighter shot, which we're excited about. So that'll be in the back of the room, but hopefully as tight of a shot as we were able to get from close up. And then we have some side angles that we're learning how to use. And we have a team of technical volunteers who are all learning as we go. And so we're trying to have patience to give ourselves freedom to experiment a little, for our speakers to adjust to no teleprompter. It's a lot of adjustments all at once. And so we're learning as we go.
That's one shift that I experienced was the number of changes that you make.
Yes.
Is the more that you dump wood on the fire, the smaller the fire gets. I see, Jason, you're like going.
Yeah, I think that, it's been so hard, Tom. I'm not who I was in my 20s. Like, the idea of making a fast adaptation to a new reality is absolutely not compelling to me right now. And so Sam knows this. This was always true about me at my former employer, where everything was videotaped. I was never the guy on camera. I have what they call red light fever. I absolutely hate being recorded video. I hate it. Didn't have a choice. Had I had a choice in COVID, I would have found a way out of it. I promise you, I would have figured out a way to not do it. But one of the things that's kind of our brand in the live stream space is that eye contact is the only way to create connection with an audience. And so so you say it's awkward for pastors to watch themselves. I actually watch myself obsessively because I'm committed to the craft of speaking. And what I noticed about that little clip you just showed is the sense you get as the audience member that I'm actually talking to you. Well, don't mind pulling the hood back and telling you the secret. There's a teleprompter on the lens of the camera. The camera we use is a cheap camera. It's a camera somebody had in the back of their pickup truck at the beginning of COVID. It's not expensive, and it certainly isn't a live stream quality. So it's a 4D Sony camera that we found an adapter, and we hang a little 45-degree black glass on it, and it's got my words projected from my phone. So I'm following that little thing in my hand, that little white thing that drives everybody crazy. That's me scrolling my text so that I can connect to eyes. I knew enough to know that was essential. Otherwise, you're just watching something happen. And I don't know what would have happened to our audience had we just had a camera watch. This is what a lot of churches do, and I know it might be the best they can do. But it feels isolating to watch the side of someone's head while they deliver something that we all know is an empty room. It just doesn't make sense to me. So we went with that sort of intimate thing. And what we're losing now is the intimate connection to the online person. And we're hoping, as we take the clutch out on that working with the energy in the room now becomes compelling enough for people to stay engaged. But there's no real evidence that we're going to survive this transition. We really don't know. It's like doing 80 miles an hour in a convertible with bald tires in the rain. Like, you could get there, or maybe you don't. Maybe the whole thing rolls over. We have no idea. So
one of the things that I've experienced, and I love, this is, I think, part of Sam's role and on staff, is if you have the creative people in the room, the frame changes. And so, but as soon as the creative person knows the frame, that's the space to be creative in. And I think most people look at that as, in fact, actually, I think as a creative person, I was a photography minor, so I've got that kind of piece in the background, and I guess an amateur video editor, video person. But the frame actually helps improve creativity. If you don't have like a canvas, you're like, well, what could I do? Give me a wall to paint on, or like point me in a direction to take pictures over here, and then I'll figure out how to be creative. So I think the secret sauce, so to speak, is just like you said, you bring in the people in the room and the creativity, and you unleash that. Sam, am I getting close to how this works?
Absolutely. And any creative, I think, will say that constraints are helpful. And so we have them. We have resources constraints and personnel constraints, and yes, now we're playing on a different palette than we were before. So that's energizing, I think, to creative folks.
When the canvas changes, creative people just paint a different painting.
Yeah.
Which is maybe what Jason was saying, like we're a convertible in a hurricane with bald tires, and the creative people are going to spin out and make it fun along the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this, Tom. If you have mediocre preaching and you have it professionally packaged and beautifully delivered, it doesn't equal anything amazing. Likewise, if you have amazing preaching but a horrible video delivery, it doesn't equal much. It has to be the two things. And so I think what pre-existed COVID for us was a kind of raw, real secret sauce around how we communicate the gospel. We do it courageously and we take risks. Half the times when we open a sermon, and I don't know if you've experienced this as you watch some of what we've done, half the time the intro is half built around the news of the week. I mean, we are very much embedded in the craft of courage. And where I don't bring any sensitivity to frame, and that's interesting to hear you guys talk about that. It makes sense to me. I would have never thought of it that way. What I bring is a commitment to the economy of words around being courageous around the simplicity of the gospel. Mm-hmm. And so it's those two things, right? And so we saw early on that Sam needed to be given a wide open lane to figure out how to stream the content across the platforms. And then that allows me to do the work of just going down in the wormhole and trying to pull courageous words from silence. And so whether or not it's working, I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Yeah. Well, we, I want to get, there's a question that one of our watchers has asked, and Leslie, our executive producer, is kind of in the background monitoring all of that. And so, Leslie, I want to invite you to come on and pitch this question from Carter to Jason and Sam.
Okay, sorry about that. Hey, Carter says, blessings upon you all. And he's asking, are the needs of in-person and remote worship similar enough that a single experience can be shared with both? So he talks about, he feels constrained to about 10 minutes for a sermon, but live, 15, 18 minutes is works for him. So what do y'all say?
Wish I knew. I so wish I knew. I don't know what to tell you. My gut says, in general, it's tough to make one thing function on both of these planes. That's my deepest fear, is that we will now have these two audiences that are estranged from one another and may not play well in the same sandbox. And so at some point we'll have to decide which one is the audience we want to keep. I hate that reality. I've been trying all year to say we cannot lose track of the people who are now following us digitally, but whether or not you can do it with the same delivery, I don't know. So one of the things I suggested, because I'm committed to this work, one of the things I suggested was maybe I shoot a live stream to a camera lens before the first of our however many services we're going to do. I'm committed enough to do that. But then the people who join us virtually say they want to feel part of the actual event itself, which means they're going to get a lot less attention and a lot more weird angles of things happening in a room. We are trusting those voices. In fact, we changed up our board of advisors to bring on a voice of a person who will never live in Austin. She's a board member who lives in Houston, but she advocates vociferously around not forgetting those who are never going to move here. And she tells us, unfiltered, that she wants to be part of an event, not spoken to as a separate engagement outside the congregation. And so, you
just said something. I really want to make sure that everybody heard that and that I heard it correctly. You have someone on your board now who's there at a distance digitally.
Yeah. I mean, listen, let's be honest. In the corporate space, if you build a board and the way to get on the board is you have to work for the company for 50 years, what's the downside? You have no new eyes in your board space. We know how boards work, right? I work corporately too. I have a separate gig that I do. It's a whole different story. We knew enough to know coming into this that if we gather up with the people who serve on our board that are all here in Austin, that all of our needs are going to be filtered through the needs of our families who come to this building. Well, now we're a multifaceted congregation. Who speaks for them? So the very first thing we did is we went out into that space and we tried to figure out who's with us, who's engaged, who has shown leadership quality, and who would be willing to do this really weird thing, which is Zoom in every month to a board of advisors meeting and retreat with us and gather with us when we do that, knowing they'll never live here. And that's what we did, because I want that voice. And not surprisingly, that very first meeting that we did in person, because we've been doing this all year in Zoom, she came with a big old axe to grind about some different issues that none of us were going to think of. You want to kill an audience? Don't represent it in your leadership spaces, and it'll go away for you. You won't have that problem anymore. It'll dissolve. And so we're committed to not do that.
Sam, I'm curious, as you think about this from a creative perspective, that dynamic of the way that I've talked about this is architecture creates expectations. Mm-hmm. And when this is something we've learned by doing church in a diner, church in a pub, church in a bowling alley. Every time you shift up where you do it at, the space demands certain expectations. And if you take the expectations of a cathedral with you and try to make those expectations live in a different architecture, they just clash constantly. You're trying to be creative in the same way on a different frame or inside a different frame. And I think that's true when it comes to this whole digital experience, that there is an online architecture. and it has certain expectations. But I wonder, but at the same time, as a creative person, to me, it feels like a challenge to find the overlapping places where the different architecture has similar expectations, or you allow the one to push a little more one way and another. Are the, as I describe that, or as you think about that in your own context, what comes to mind, or what, as you're navigating that same dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I think also both spaces bring really different possibilities. So there are so many things we can do now that we have people in the room, that folks online that will work in the room, that won't work online, that won't translate. But there are some principles that I'm learning do serve both. For example, anytime we switch up our template, I think it serves both the in-the-room experience and online, to not always be able to predict and we don't do this very well or very often, but to not always be able to predict what order things are going to happen in. Because you can see online, a lot of our folks kind of sleep through the worship, tune in for the sermon, and then sleep through the worship. And one of my sadnesses about the online experience is that I think church has become something we only consume and no longer participate in or get to be part of the exchange. So my creativity and my thinking has been a lot around how to make online church feel more participatory. And I think part of that can come from the element of surprise and catching folks off guard. And that always works in the room too. So there's certain things that hold true for both. And then there are certain opportunities that only exist in each space. And we're learning, I think we're going to have to take bigger risks for those and know that there's going to be payoff sometimes for the people in the room. And sometimes there's going to be payoff for the people online.
Yeah. You know, thinking about that, that's really good, Sam. That's why Sam does what she does. Thinking about that, it occurs to me that if you're a pastor and you're listening to this and you're concerned about this, if you don't have all the tools in place at the moment, here's what you can do immediately. You can begin to create a culture, if you haven't already, that doesn't celebrate the polish, but celebrates the experimentation, right? So having worked for a highly polished ministry, we didn't have the opportunity at my former employer to experiment. Like, the template was the template and 40 million people consumed it, so you didn't mess with it. But one of the first things I began to create here, and it pre-existed me to some degree, but when you involve artists and artistic folks and you're throwing pottery live in the middle of a service and you're using your walls as a gallery and you're not sure, how do you tell this person this is good, this is appropriate, this isn't? When you're doing that, you have to create a culture that says we don't have to be shiny and polished, we get to experiment. And so honestly, Sam and I will wring our hands and we'll sit in our staff meeting on Tuesdays and we'll wonder, will this work, will it not? But at some point by Saturday afternoon, we remind each other, it doesn't have to be perfect, because we've done the work to create a culture that says we are going to experiment. And so we get to sort of learn on the fly. You know, you can't steer a speedboat across a lake with a single adjustment. You've got to adjust it a million times, because the wind and the air and the water, everything interacts. You can point it, but you got to make a million adjustments if you're going to cross a lake. And so that's something you can do as a leader right now, is you can lower the bar of expectation around perfection, and you can just go with the charm that says we're doing the best we can do. We will do it with excellence. We're not going to be shabby, but it doesn't have to be polished.
I think that's so important to hear. At Sycamore Creek, our three core values are to be curious, creative, and compassionate. And when we talk about being creative, it means that we're willing to experiment, which means that we're willing to fail. But in the end, we want to get it done. So we don't want to make the same mistakes over and over every week, but we are willing to make mistakes for a couple weeks while we're trying to figure out in the experimentation how to get it done.
That's right.
Yep. And I hear you trying to free people up. I mean, most of us are not having to get it right in front of 50,000 people.
Right.
Right.
Boy. Yeah. That's just
so.
Yeah.
All right, I was so in the moment, I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. So
I love
that. Let me get back to the script.
That means you're listening. You're not thinking about what you're going to say next. We could all take a lesson from that.
Yeah. That's our challenge. Every pastor has to think about what's coming out of their mouth and what's going to come out next. So, I think what I'd like to do, you guys had something where all the creativity shut down, and it was actually in the national news. You had this weird moment where Up here in Michigan, we call it a snow day. But we have snow plows, so you can still get to church on snow days.
Listen, the detail that you're going to forget to mention is that we also lost power. So Michigan gets cold too if you can't heat your house. So I don't want to hear it, Michigan.
All right. Well, hey, here's a little clip from that day when you all lost power and couldn't get into your building.
Oh my word, you guys. Apologies for not being able to go live at 9:30. We're working on a technology issue. Anyway, good morning to all, one and all. Coming to you live from our farmhouse in Buda, just outside of Austin. Y'all, the weather's been drinking. I mean, it's been drinking for days now down here, and it's acting all kinds of foolish. There's nothing we can do. What can I tell you? Oh, wait, I'm supposed to switch hats right about here. I can't preach in a winter hat. Anyway, if you're watching from Indiana or Iowa, send the plows. We might not survive this mercury drop. Lows of 2 degrees tomorrow equal the end of life on planet Earth, at least in Texas, which I'm pretty sure is about half of planet Earth. I mean, we were riding motorcycles last week. It hit 85 degrees. Life was perfect. But it's all over now. We've lost the battle. This might be our very last transmission. It's been a fun run. 2 degrees is unsurvivable. Goodbye. I don't know why it's so much fun to horse around on a Sunday morning, but we're trying to make the best of it down here. We have a nimble team, and we can live stream from just about anywhere, provided I'm not the one in charge of technology. We're never going to put people's lives at risk to pull off a Sunday service by driving our overpasses to church. We're just not going to do it. It just doesn't make sense, and so we'll come to you however we can. It's also why we aren't dying to go back to in-person services until it's safe. This medium, it's perfect. It's not flawless, I know, but it's safe, and I'm thankful that we're able to connect with you in this way. Anyway, happy Valentine's Day, right? I mean, if you didn't get out and get your card, you're too late, I suppose. So here we are, only a few days away from Ash Wednesday and the official beginning of Lent, 2021. We've been working overtime to get ready, and we're hoping that you enjoy the completely analog companion that we've prepared for you, something we're calling the Lenten box. If you don't think that you needed to sign up to get one of your Lenten boxes, then you sort of blew it. Our team prepped and packed and shipped and handed them out all week long. Never has more love and handwritten content gone out from this place. And it wasn't cheap, but it was hand done. It was analog, which is the new cool, I'm told, since we live entirely in a digital world now.
There's so much I love about that.
Oh, man. What do you love about that, Tom? That was my living room, by the way, with no power, just the power from phone, and then having to load that up in some weird way, and it didn't work, and it didn't go live because I couldn't get on, and apparently I don't have administrative rights over our Facebook page, and all the crap went sideways. None of my staff could get to either where I was. I couldn't get to where they were. That was the ugliest, the ugliest day of the year, but whatever. What did you love about that?
I love the messiness of it. I love the playfulness of it. I love your quirkiness. And I think I want to ask this question of Sam more than you. Sam, tell us about the hats. Like, do we all need to wear hats and turquoise jewelry?
Oh my goodness!
Like, what is it like? What does that do or not do?
I tell you, our team would say that what it does is create a real lighting challenge that we have been working on all year. You know, I was talking to a pastor recently who's got a real cool church in Chicago, a storytelling church. And she said, the absence of an aesthetic is an aesthetic. It's just a boring one. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, I just think we are unabashedly boutique in some ways. And I think that, like, his background, not trying to get a white background, just being like, these are my books. It's far more interesting. We're all real people, and it's real people watching online, which can be hard to remember when we refer to them as virtuals. They're not robots, they're real people. And I think that's maybe one of the beautiful things to come out of COVID is just the intimacy we see now peering into each other's homes. And so letting that personality come out on stage certainly makes the artist feel more at home, and I think is something to celebrate.
Yeah, what you need to know, Tom, is that I'm an Enneagram 4. I'm a self-preserving Enneagram 4, which means I'm never going to do what the people next to me are doing, period. So if y'all have to build a light bar to accommodate for the hat, it's how I'm known in my hometown, right? So like I can't go anywhere with this hat on and not be recognized by somebody. And it's just my embrace of my own quirkiness, and it just isn't ever going to change. And so that's just who I am, and the team embraces it, and they roll their eyes, and it's just like, not Sam so much as others who, they shop at Costco for their outfits or whatever. But so I'm just a weird dude. I'm just going to embrace it, and I'll bring a clerical collar in on top of it just to throw in an extra thing, and just that's just me.
You wear a Texas hat.
That's right.
You wear a clerical collar.
That's right.
You wear a jacket and turquoise
jewelry.
Jewelry.
Pre-Columbian Latin American cosmological tattoos because why not, right? So it's the whole thing. So.
See, there's a part of me though that I think that you've hit on something that works on the internet, and that is quirkiness. Mm-hmm. And most pastors don't let their quirkiness come out very often. They try to be a sort of flat projection screen in their demeanor and worship, and they try not to have anything particularly eccentric about it. But I think that's a component of this creativity, and ultimately I think it's an expression of the beauty of the image of God in each one of us in a different way, a unique way, which, I don't think people are going to be successful by deciding to wear hats and try to act like you.
Right.
But there is something that's true of them that's not true of any of us.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's the permission to be creative. You should see some of the creative stuff that goes on in this building. I mean, you should see some of the, if you can't create it from the top, basically saying you get to be yourself in this space and we can call that worship. If you don't do that from the top, then no one's going to do that beneath you. So if you're a committed to vanilla kind of leader who doesn't ever want to be quirky or stand out, and yet you want to create creative sort of a groundswell underneath you, it's never going to happen. You have to somehow be yourself and invite others to be themselves. And so that's the before I had a call to ministry, I was different than the rest. Just my story, and so I don't fight it anymore, and I don't apologize for it. It's just the way we do it here. So.
If you were up in Michigan, by the way, you would wear that winter hat all the time. That would be your life. That's my life through 9 out of the 12 months of the year.
Well, I did 15 years in Chicago, and Sam, of course, is from Chicago, so we are no strangers to that. Yeah. Well, we're kind of wrapping this up here, and as I reflect back on this conversation as a whole, something that's just really striking me. This is the first time I've had a chance to meet Sam. And Jason, you and I and Leslie, our executive producer, had the chance to talk. But what's striking me about all this is that what you all have created and the kind of beauty and excellence of it isn't built on Samantha being an amazing digital expert. She's not like a web designer. She's not a live streamer. You brought one of our things that we've noticed as we've talked with pastors and churches that seem to be thriving, at least in some sense, online, of creating something beautiful and excellent and engaging, is that this creative digital person is kind of like the new wingman or wingwoman beside them. That's helping remove obstacles for, I'd say, some of that quirkiness and authenticity, rawness, realness to come out. Rather than to stumble through the technology and miss all of that, the beauty of who each person is. And that's what I'm hearing. And you bring enough creative people in the room and you'll figure it out. Yeah. I think you're right. I think what you're implying, and this I hadn't thought about this until just this very moment, but I think there should be a sequence if you're going to make some strategic hires. You can go straight for the person who knows the digital platforms and knows how to produce it. But I would start with the artistic mastermind, and that's what Sam is. Sam is the content genius. She's we didn't talk about this. This was in our notes. Maybe you'll ask it later, but Sam engages the manuscript throughout the entire week on a Google Doc as I shape it. So she's weaving that thread the entire way through so that when I walk in the room, I don't have to do any engaging whatsoever with the people who actually take it to the web. But if I had to pick a sequence, I would start with the artist, and then I would find the technician. Because if the art, if it's not courageous and the artistry isn't bold, and I don't care about the production, it won't go anywhere. It'll go beautifully nowhere. I would rather beautifully go or chaotically go many places than I would rather perfectly go nowhere. Do you get what I'm saying? So the sequence for us, the best decision we made in COVID was to invite Sam to step in and explore that. And, we didn't hire her. It was kind of a joke. We didn't hire her with a specific job description. It was, we really don't know what we need. Can you help us figure this out? And we built the job description after the fact, because you don't constrain artistic people and tell them you want this done and that done and that done. I don't have those chops. No one here is pretending. I don't know how to do the content streaming. I don't know how to do the packaging of it all together. And so the sequence, you got to get that right. If you get you just got to get the sequence right. And I'm talking to the pastors out there.
There may be certain, like I think our last month's episode, that person existed in one person that had both the creativity and the digital chops. But that's a unique person, because a lot of digital people are kind of sort of nerdy and just want to sit in front of a computer all day and edit video. That's a unique person. Sam, I'm going to give you the last word here before we wrap it up. As you heard Jason, this is the first time I've heard him say that they hired you without a job description.
No, that's not entirely honest, but it's close, isn't it, Sam? I mean, there's a little.
We had a rough that's the thing.
Yeah, just reflect a little bit more as you hear him, or that process, and how you figured out what they needed to get to the point where you are today.
Well, I'm honored to hear him say those things, and I am so grateful to be at it. It's part of what drew us to ANC and keeps us there, to be at a church that values artists. I think the church at large has widely underutilized artists. And so it is really meaningful to me to get to do this for a living. And so, I think learning what we needed, I'm still learning. And, now we're a year in, and I feel like we have a good handle on the I'm thing, and now we're going to hybrid. So I think I've learned to adapt quickly. I'm grateful for an environment that values experimentation. We don't feel locked in. We can try something and try something else the next week. And then just learning how highly relational, especially at a small church, this role really is, to because I don't have all the skills. I need to know who to pull in when, and build relationships so that it doesn't just feel purely transactional. And that's been hard during COVID, but the few artists that we've really started to build those with, I think, feel deeply invested now. And that's been really rewarding for us.
Yeah. Well, hey, friends, thank you for joining us here today. And if you're still watching with us, or even if you watch this later, give a shout out to Jason and Sam. Thank God for them today. This webinar is brought to you by Reach Resources, which is a part of the Reach movement, which is sponsored by the Church Vibrancy team of the Michigan Conference of the United Methodist Church. And in January, we featured Tech Talk and demonstrated how to overcome tech problems, as well as using technology effectively for ministry moving forward, pandemic or post-pandemic. I mean, that's a theme we're hearing over and over again. Watch our past webinars on YouTube by searching for Reach Resources, or watch them here on our Facebook page at Reach Movement MI under the video tabs above. By the way, viewers, please be sure to like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ReachMovementMI. That way you'll stay ahead of the latest Reach Movement news. For example, on June 17th, we're going to chat with Pastor Wendy Hudson and Creative Director Stanton Adams of Two Rivers Church in Charleston, South Carolina. This will be the third of this series, hashtag Your Digital Team, and each team is just a little bit different. Each of them have kind of put the creative sauces together and come out with something different. And also plan now for our 2021 Reach Summit coming on October 22nd and 23rd. Nona Jones, the author of From Social Media to Social Ministry and Success from the Inside Out, will keynote this event. Visit reachsummit.org to learn more. And be sure to check out reachresources.org, where there are nearly 30 podcasts with pastors, authors, consultants, and coaches about various areas of improving the effectiveness of your ministry. Don't miss this catalog of great conversations that we've had over the last several years, plus audio files of all of our webinars. So I think we want to go out here with Samantha, put together a unique benediction for that Ash Wednesday service. So let's end today with this benedictory poem.
This is a prayer poem for Ash Wednesday called Changer by Native American poet and Methodist clergy Adrian Trevethan. Cover me with ashes, the thick smoke soot of the earth. Make my breathing like the journey from death into life, second by second, prayer by prayer. Cover me with a cloak. Bring me low to the earth, your justice whispering to me like the gleam of red rocks, the colors dancing in the darkness. Let me know the power of sage and cedar in my bones, not that I may trap them there, but bring them forth in words. Cover me with darkness, with the presence of my elders, their tears falling around me, reminding me of why we are here. Sighing, groaning with our singing, longing to hear us into being, stretching us beyond breathing and praying and weeping. Cover me with mercy. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice, like the woman who channeled every ounce of courage and dignity to touch your cloak and find new life. Breathe unto me life anew, of possibility, of beauty, of balance, of grace. Cover me with mud. Bring me to my lowest state, so that in my weaknesses I see your strength, the reflection of your eyes in the brokenness around me, the fullness of your love in the depths of our hearts. Cover me with ashes, the ashes of my grandmother, who in her living days knew no strangers, worked tirelessly with worn hands, and lifted grandchildren high into the air. Cover me with mercy. Let my cheek come to rest on the cold earth, its faithful presence a call to walk humbly beyond myself, beyond my fears, and ever onto the red road that leads to your love. Changer, cover me with ashes. Change me.
And all who agreed said or typed or used the prayer emoji. Amen. Peace out, friends.